All right, let's dive in. We're tackling what might just be the biggest paradox in modern business today. I'm talking about the cybersecurity conundrum facing, well, the backbone of our economy. Small and mid-sized businesses, SMBs. Think about it. They face the exact same cyber threats, sometimes even more targeted, complex attacks like ransomware, sophisticated phishing as these huge enterprises. But, and this is the kicker, they're trying to defend themselves with security budgets that honestly look like rounding errors on a big company's balance sheet. How can you possibly build like Fortune 500 security on a Main Street budget? Okay, let's unpack this then. Our sources are suggesting there's a pretty fundamental shift happening. It seems managed service providers, MSPs, are stepping up. They're leveraging some advanced platforms, lots of automation, to try and bridge this huge budget security gap. So our mission today is a deep dive into how scalable enterprise-grade protection might finally be getting accessible for, well, everyone, regardless of size.
Yeah. And the urgency here, it's not theoretical. It's really profound. We've got the stats to prove it. You look at Verizon's data breach investigations report. It's striking. Nearly half, we're talking 46% of all breaches now hit organizations with fewer than 1,000 employees. So that means an SMB's exposure level. It's absolutely enterprise level. But their security teams, often non-existent. Or maybe it's just one poor IT person wearing 50 different hats, And that creates a really, really painful core challenge for the MSPs trying to serve them. Clients know they need security. They're demanding credible, comprehensive outcomes like 247 protection, but the budgets are just so tight. And to make things even harder, these aren't simple environments anymore. You're often dealing with this complex mix of servers on-prem, multiple clouds like Azure or AWS, and this growing mess of IoT devices. The attack surface is just enormous, and the resources minimal.
That really pushes us straight into the tech side of things, doesn't it? Because if an MSP tries to secure that kind of complex, mixed environment using the traditional approach, a firewall here, some antivirus there, maybe a separate tool for logs, they're just immediately drowning. Our sources kept highlighting this phrase. Traditional tools generate noise instead of clarity.
Oh, absolutely. It's the classic SOC nightmare, right? Yeah. The Security Operations Center challenge. You've got maybe 10 different tools, all just spitting out alerts on the 10 different screens. They flood the MSP with thousands, maybe tens of thousands of signals every single day. But here's the problem. These tools, they don't talk to each other. They don't correlate anything. They don't connect the dots. And connecting those dots is what you absolutely need to turn a random alert into something you can actually act on, an actionable incident.
Okay, so if the real bottleneck isn't necessarily the threat itself, but it's the data noise created because all these tools are siloed, what's the tech framework that cuts through all that?
Well, what's really fascinating here is that the solution, it really hinges on efficiency, technological efficiency, achieved through shared infrastructure, heavy automation, and managed delivery models. Our sources point pretty strongly towards a core technology, the Open XDR platform. Think of models like Stellar Cyber, often delivered through services like Enhanced.io. Right? Think of Open XDR less like just another tool and more like a centralized brain for the whole security operation. If the old way is like having 20 different security guards all yelling their own observations into separate walkie-talkies, suspicious package here, backdoor alarm, OpenXDR is like the single detective, the one who takes all that telemetry, all that raw data from everywhere, and correlates it instantly to tell a single coherent story about what's actually happening.
I like that analogy, the detective pulling it all together. So what exactly is it correlating? Where's the data coming from?
It's specifically designed to unify the whole process, threat detection, investigation, and response, right across the entire IT stack. So that means it's pulling in data from, well, pretty much everything that matters. Endpoints, firewalls, cloud platforms, SaaS tools like Microsoft 365, identity systems, email security gateways, and crucially, network traffic sensors. By unifying this massive amount of data, the system gets this complete visibility that, honestly, no single human or point solution could ever hope to achieve on its own. Then there's an AI-driven engine that takes those literally thousands of raw signals and, using correlation, transforms them into maybe 5 or 10 genuinely actionable incidents. That's the clarity MSPs are desperate for.
Okay, that makes sense from a technical standpoint, but let me ask the skeptical question here. If you're hooking into all those different systems, potentially noisy firewalls, verbose log systems, how does OpenXDR actually filter the junk data from the useful signals? Aren't you just potentially integrating even more noise?
That's a really critical question. And the difference, it really lies in that AI correlation engine. You see, traditional tools might give you a high-fidelity alert, but only within their own little silo. The endpoint tool knows about the endpoint, period. OpenXDR uses machine learning-specific detection rules to connect events across those different domains. So, for example, it might see a failed login attempt pop up in the identity system, then maybe a download from an unusual IP address that the firewall flagged, and then maybe a weird process injection that the endpoint agent spotted. Separately, each of those might just be written off as noise, right? But when the AI connects them, that sequence becomes strong evidence of a potentially complex attack chain. It's that multi-domain context that filters the noise.
Got it. Context is everything. Okay, let's pivot then to the reality for the service provider, the MSP. Even with this amazing unified tech, the MSP still has to operate it, right? As you said, they're already juggling endpoint management, backup, cloud support. They simply don't have the capacity, let alone the budget, to suddenly build and staff a full 24/7 internal security operations center, a SOC. That infrastructure, those analysts, it's just prohibitively expensive for most.
Right, and this is why the managed model seems to be the strategic breakthrough here. Services like Enhance.io, they package up this enterprise-grade OpenXCR correlation capability into what's essentially a done-for-you white label service. And crucially, this lets the MSP keep their current tech stack largely intact. It integrates with what they already use. It doesn't usually force them into a really costly and disruptive rip-and-replace situation.
It's exactly. The MSP keeps control of that all-important client relationship, but the managed service partner handles the really heavy lifting of the security operations side. And that includes having experienced analysts doing the 24/7 monitoring and that critical initial alert triage. That's something very, very few SMBs could ever possibly afford on their own. And it goes beyond just monitoring. They often provide automated response playbooks. These can, say, isolate a compromised user account or quarantine a malicious file way faster than any human could possibly react. Plus, they usually include continuous threat hunting. That's proactively searching for those subtle signs of compromise, things that might not have even triggered an actual alert yet. This really shifts the MSP from being just a reactive firefighter to more of a proactive guardian.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting for me, because we have to talk about the money. How does taking a platform that clearly needs 247 human oversight, advanced AI, continuous hunting, how does delivering that to a small business actually become affordable and predictable in terms of cost? It sounds inherently expensive.
Yeah. The affordability is, it's kind of the engineering feat here. And it works because of really three interlocking elements that allow for some pretty extreme scalability. First, the whole financial structure relies entirely on shared infrastructure and multi-tenancy. So instead of one client having to buy and maintain their own dedicated software, hardware, and analysts, the cost of the core platform, the analyst team, the specialized tools, all that gets distributed. By spreading those pretty massive operational costs across hundreds, maybe thousands of MSP clients, the price per individual client just drops dramatically. Second, they help eliminate that tool sprawl issue we talked about. Since everything funnels into one unified platform, the MSP isn't juggling 5 different vendor contracts, 5 interfaces, 5 billing cycles. That cuts down their admin overhead and training costs significantly. And critically, the pricing is often tiered. This lets an MSP start with maybe a baseline security offering and then scale the coverage up as their client grows, or maybe as the regulatory needs increase.
Okay, so shared infrastructure deals with the expensive labor costs, and the unified platform helps with the vendor management headache. But the real engine driving that affordable scale, as we kind of touched on, it has to be the automation and the AI, right?
Absolutely. The AI is the critical backbone that makes this whole shared model financially viable at the SMB level. Without it, you'd still need far too many human analysts, and the service just wouldn't scale down to an SMB-friendly price point. The AI is doing that automated threat detection and correlation we discussed. It ensures the alerts that do get surfaced are accurate and immediate. This drastically speeds up the overall mean time to respond, the MTTR, from what might have been hours or even days in a traditional setup down to just minutes. And here's probably the single most important economic factor for the MSP themselves: that high degree of automation. Our sources suggest it can cut the manual triage workload by up to 80%. 80? So when an alert comes in, the system's already done the initial legwork, the investigation, correlation, gathering context. This frees up the MSP's existing engineers. They're no longer constantly chasing down false positives or low-priority noise. They can actually focus on higher-value client projects or actual remediation work instead of just constantly firefighting. In practical terms, it means an MSP could potentially protect, say, 4 times as many clients with the same technical staff they have right now.
Wow, an 80% reduction in manual effort. That completely changes the profitability equation for the MSP. Okay, let's switch back to the client perspective, though. SMBs don't just want efficiency for their MSP, they want measurable protection for themselves. They need reassurance that the money they're spending on security isn't just disappearing into some kind of invisible cost center they pay every month. How does the MSP actually prove the value they're delivering with this model?
This is absolutely vital for keeping clients long-term. MSPs using this kind of model can demonstrate really clear, tangible outcomes. Instead of just sending a bill that lists activities, we ran a scan, we monitored logs, they deliver comprehensive client-ready reports. These reports often include things like monthly summaries of vulnerabilities found and incidents handled. They track remediation progress. They show risk reduction metrics over time. So they can literally show the client month over month, look, last month you had 20 high-risk vulnerabilities here, and after our services, you now only have 5. They can demonstrate a clear reduction in that mean time to respond, proving they're stopping threats faster.
And I imagine this clarity really helps with compliance needs too, right? Especially if the SMB falls under regulations like HIPAA or CMMC or something similar.
Exactly. The dashboards and the reporting are often designed to align with specific compliance frameworks. They actively demonstrate how the security services are helping the client meet those mandatory requirements. This fundamentally transforms security. It stops being just a necessary evil, a cost to be minimized, and becomes a critical, measurable service that clearly justifies renewals, maybe even upsells, because the MSP is showing actual demonstrable progress in securing the business.
Okay, this feels like a monumental strategic shift for MSPs. So if an MSP is currently stuck in that reactive support model, maybe relying on that noisy traditional tool stack, what are the first practical steps they should take to move towards this more proactive security leadership role? Well, the sources we looked at outline a pretty clear, practical path. Step one seems to be assess your client's risk exposure. You really have to understand their current coverage gaps, where their biggest compliance headaches are. Step two, activate the managed service. Connect their existing tools into the platform or maybe deploy some lightweight data sensors. Again, the key is usually no disruptive rip and replace needed upfront. And finally, step three, start delivering those measurable outcomes immediately. Use the automated reporting right from day one to showcase the improvements you're making. Start building that client trust based on tangible data, not just promises.
Yeah, this approach isn't just about selling some new piece of tech. It's really about enabling the MSP to become a true strategic security partner for their clients. It fundamentally changes their position in the market. It allows them to actually compete effectively with much larger enterprise-focused security consultants, but deliver that value at a price point that actually makes sense for the average small business owner.
So wrapping this up, what does this all really mean? It sounds like the era where top-tier cybersecurity excellence was basically reserved for giant enterprises.
Uh-huh.
That era might be ending. That kind of enterprise-grade protection, the open XDR intelligence, the 24/7 monitoring, the proactive threat hunting, it seems it's now becoming genuinely accessible, profitable for the provider, and totally scalable, mainly thanks to these unified platforms and heavy automation.
It leads to a pretty provocative thought, doesn't it? If automation can genuinely cut that manual triage workload by something like 80%, and if it can turn security from this invisible, begrudging cost into a measurable, visible service that demonstrates value, what kinds of new opportunities does that truly create for MSPs? They have the potential now to move way beyond just being reactive IT support providers. They can become genuine, proactive security leaders, confidently guiding their clients through what is, let's face it, an incredibly complex and dangerous threat landscape. That's definitely something to think about the next time you look at your own company's security spend.